the topic today is really like how to deal or how to effectively communicate with your colleagues. I think that's always a particularly interesting and at the most challenging situation sometimes. But before we get into all of that, I think it's always nice to get to know the people we interview on like a different level, because you're a trained psychologist, right?
Yeah, that's right. I'm a trained clinical psychologist. So I've been working as one for the past 10 years now. I've been working in the mental health field for about that duration. Yeah.
So I'm always curious, especially those who go into helping professions. Like when you were a kid, did you see yourself as a psychologist, or what did you envision yourself to be when you grew up?
Well, when the whole concept of what a therapist was, I used to watch a lot of Oprah as a kid. I know it's such a weird thing to watch at such a young age, but I used to love yeah. Yeah, I used to love how she would interview her guests, and how she would be sharing all these stories on and people who have gone through adversities in their lives and how they came out of it, and then she'll invite the experts, and that used to really inspire me. But on the side, I actually was very interested in criminal law as well, and understanding the minds of individuals who commit crimes. So,
Wow.
I used to have this worldview that assumed that, the best intention everyone, and that people are inherently good, and, something terrible must have happened to them for them to have made mistakes or to break the law. So, I thought that, okay, it would be nice to maybe be a lawyer, just to understand, the minds of criminals. But when it was time to choose what path I wanted to take in university, I realized that the elements that I enjoyed about understanding crime were more psychologically based. And so I also saw firsthand how mental illness and emotional distress do affect family and friends in my own social circle. And so I felt like this was an area I wanted to understand and pursue further. Yeah.
That's awesome. I think it's great that when you're a kid, you firmly believe that people are inherently good. It must be a terrible. Yeah, exactly. Can you imagine growing up and thinking everyone's evil? That's such a bad place to start.
Yeah, it's true. Kids are so innocent, and they have unconditional positive regard for everyone, which is something that, as adults, we kind of lose along the way as we grow older because of circumstances or stress. But that is something that a lot of us need to start to develop more, just learning to give benefit of doubt a bit more, practicing more kindness. These are elements that, we actually have quite a lot to learn from kids.
Yeah, it's true. I 100% agree. And do you mind if I share with you my very first experience with Oprah was because I can remember this so vividly because it was so funny to me, but at the same time so what a contrast, because I remember it was a school holiday. And so Oprah has two shows, right? One is like the daytime talk show, and one is like the nighttime talk show. And so at 3, it was like in the afternoon, I was before my afternoon nap, I was just watching after lunch, and I saw that the daytime talk show, and she was like, it was such a serious topic, and I can't remember the topic now, but let's just assume she was just saying 100 people are raped in Uganda every minute. Then you're like, huh? Wow, so hardcore.
Yeah, and then, she'll share all these stats. Yeah,
exactly. And it's it takes you and it grips you. And then at 8 p.m. there was another Oprah, and then this time she was like, "Ladies and gentlemen, Denzel Washington." And you're like, what kind of interviewer are you? You're just so diverse.
Exactly, so diverse. But I think her as she progressed in her career, I think her later episodes were more tailored towards mental health and emotional well-being. But yeah, you're right. It's very diverse in terms of the topics and content she covers.
Yeah, and she's a fantastic interviewer. In fact, some of my standard questions for the podcast are direct questions that she asks people, and there's actually one that I'll ask you as well, because I really like that question.
Okay.
But anyway, we digress.
Yes.
So since today's topic is really about effective communication at the workplace, a good place to really start is, especially with your expertise, it'd be good to understand why it is important to really have effective communication skills in the workplace compared to simply just being yourself.
That's a really good question, actually. I think there's nothing wrong with being yourself. I mean, you definitely should strive to manifest healthy elements, healthy main point, healthy elements and values of your personality within the workplace. So, for example, being hardworking or reliable or dedicated, definitely, you should try to manifest that within the workplace. But of course, given that we are all unique individuals with different perspectives, thoughts, and beliefs, it's important for us to be mindful of what are some of the communicative techniques that can enhance and maybe improve the dynamics in a workplace environment. So you can still be yourself, but it's good to just be mindful that, okay, we're in a situation where there are so many different types of personalities and people. It would be good to pick up some skills and strategies so that we can be effective, and we can create job satisfaction. There'll be lesser conflict as well, and overall just increase productivity. Yeah, in my work, like I find that the clients who come in, who have supportive like managers or bosses, they feel a sense of like psychological safety where they feel like they will not be punished or humiliated for speaking out their ideas and concerns. People usually who work in that type of work environment tend to thrive in as opposed to like cultures where everyone's just kind of like rushing the deadlines and just having a lot of their own hidden agendas. Yeah,
That's a good point. I think psychological safety is and apart from having great managers who lend great support to you, I think it's also just ensuring that there's some level of certainty in the workplace, right? Just making sure like you're not always looking over your shoulder or having to worry about especially during the times of COVID where your job security is affected.
Exactly.
I think all these especially in my personal experience, kind of change the way you communicate in the workplace as well. Everyone maybe might sometimes turn into like survival mode almost.
Yes, it's true. Like they all go into like they all go into this mode where they are surviving and they're not thriving. So they're just so focused on like and it's really just driven by anxiety because they don't like the situation they're in and they just feel very out of control. So the way they cope with that is just by keeping to the here and now and just trying to like get to the next day. Yeah, but definitely like now in the circumstances that we live in, with a lot of companies doing like Zoom meetings or working from home, all the more it's important to have effective communication because that will become like the thing that you try to rely on since you can't actually understand the nuances that come from face-to-face interaction.
Yeah and that's interesting because how does one even know if we're communicating effectively or not?
That's another good question, Nick.
well, thank you.
You wrote it out.
I'm on a roller today.
Well, I think definitely having self-awareness is important, to maybe before you start work, just in your own quiet reflection time, to ask yourself like, how do I want to present myself at work? What are some of the qualities that I want to manifest? And then when you do go to work, just be mindful of, what your body language is like, how people react to you. Like if you notice that people tend to, sometimes we do this thing where we mirror the other person, how the other person is responding to us. So if we are speaking really quickly and then the person that we're talking to gets very flustered as well, then maybe we should take a step back and realize that okay, maybe we are being a little bit kanchiong, maybe we're being a bit like overly anxious around this person, or a lot of people tend to be non-confrontive, especially in like the Asian context, where we're not the type of people who would usually confront our bosses or supervisors or address issues like, head on. So we tend to avoid. So sometimes that avoidance behavior as well can be, not very disadvantageous in the work setting. So I think just having that awareness of what's going on and also to be aware of your own thought patterns, that is something that's important to be mindful of. So if you notice that, you have a tendency to jump to certain conclusions, like for example, they didn't invite you for an office lunch, let's say, and then you're like, you automatically think like, oh, they don't like me, but actually it's not that, they were planning your birthday party, so, or if like, you have the fear of failure, if you realize that internally you have this fear that, okay, you're going to mess up. So definitely that anxiety will be projected in how you operate in your workplace. You either may be very tense, or you might just assume that people will automatically not believe in you, or may think that you're being incompetent. So these are some of the things, in a nutshell to be mindful of, so that you have an idea of like whether or not you're communicating effectively in work.
Yeah, it's interesting because you kind of struck a nerve in the sense that I tend to avoid. It's okay. I tend to avoid conflicts. Mainly because I would say I don't like feeling annoyed and frustrated, and by extension angry. I think it's also it also stems from my history since secondary school, where I used to have like an anger problem. And so it's like an ugly side of me. I don't really want it to see the light of day. And so because of that, ever since secondary school or post secondary school, I've tended to avoid conflict. So I suppose, when you have all these kinds of practices that result in bad communication skills, like is it a case of, okay, do I need to confront my willingness to deal with conflict, or is it just me trying to find better ways to deal with the person I'm speaking to? If that makes sense. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. I mean, like what you did, because of maybe some sort of trauma or some sort of trigger, maybe the very first time when you showed, you expressed your anger in public or to friends, and it had such an adverse reaction, it probably made you feel like, okay, I need to maybe cope with this and maybe repress some of those feelings. And so you in turn maladaptively coped by repressing it. Sorry, I'm like therapizing you right now.
That's cool. I would like to be therapized so I can learn too.
Yeah, so I mean, even though you thought that was the best thing to do, what happens when we repress our emotions is that it can manifest in other ways, or we tend to form like very maladaptive assumptions about ourselves and the world, and then that in turn affects how we interact with other people. So, even though that may have been the easier, quote unquote thing to do by just repressing and avoiding, in the short term, it does get rid of the problem momentarily, but in the long term, it doesn't actually teach you that, hey, you're safe with your emotions, you can express it, and it's okay to feel angry. You just need to find a better way of expressing it, whether it's through journaling, self-reflection, talking to people, showing vulnerability, so yeah, I think it's definitely beneficial to process and understand and learn how to deal with these emotions, rather than to keep it bottled up inside and to avoid it.
Yeah, I think you're right in terms of it's always helped when I talk to people, not necessarily because they are objective third parties, but mainly because they allow me the opportunity to release my thoughts, so that I can try to comprehend what is going through. Whereas if there's no one that acts as a soundboard, then it becomes harder. You're just assuming a lot of things.
And then you think that it's wrong to get angry, or I shouldn't be having this emotion. Like, what's wrong with me? And you just go down this very negative rabbit hole where it's very self-deprecating in the long run. So yeah, I think just having that honest conversations with people that you trust, of course, to just say that, when this thing happened, it made me feel a certain way, and I'm not sure how else to process this. Maybe you can give me like another viewpoint, or like, maybe you interpret this in a different way. Like, maybe you can tell me a little bit more what you thought about it. So I think just putting it out there, and showing that vulnerability really actually helps to alleviate the situation. And then you gain so much just from processing it. And then when you when you know better, you do better. That's what Oprah said.
Wow.
Quoting Oprah.
She's getting a lot of airtime in this episode.
Yeah.
So maybe we can use that as an example to kind of elaborate on communication skills here. So let's say I'm one who avoids confrontation.
Mm-hmm.
That's a bad example or a bad communication skill. What is a good way to communicate more effectively, especially if I'm upset or someone else is upset, so that we can get to the solution faster rather than beat around the bush.
Yeah, so I think the first step, is to be calm and neutral, So I know it sounds so simple, but it's so difficult for most of us to do in the moment, because I mean, I don't know about you, but when something happens that is so unforeseen for me, I straight away go into this like headless chicken mode, where I'm like, okay, how do I solve it? How do I get rid of this tension that I'm feeling inside? So a lot of us are not comfortable with that uncertainty. So I guess it's just learning to embrace that uncertainty and tell yourself that, okay, I don't need to know all the answers right now. I need to give myself the space and time to figure it out. So definitely being calm and neutral in our interactions is a good thing to do. And also to remind yourself what the healthy boundaries are. Because it really depends on how you got into that conflict with your colleague. So I don't know what would be a good example you think of.
Wow.
Okay, I can think of one. Maybe
No. I mean, I was just gonna say, since I'm very good at avoiding conflicts, it's been a while since I had one, so I might be a bad example.
Okay. Well, I think if someone is avoidant, definitely being calm, knowing what your boundaries are, so not feeling as if like you need to share everything with that person, just to get rid of that emotion or that distress that you may be feeling. So know what your limits are in terms of how much you want to share and how much you want to keep for yourself. And really having those healthy boundaries are part of self-care. I think it's even more important in toxic relationships, or when you have a very difficult colleague that you have to deal with. We can talk a little bit more about it later. But in terms of like, being avoidant in interactions, I think communicating clearly is something that's important too, So, telling them that, okay, and it's okay if it's not perfect, even if you address it and say that, okay, I'm not really sure like how to say this, but, just to take the pressure off yourself. Say, I'm not really sure how to handle this, but, when you did this, it made me feel a certain way. And, is this something that maybe we can talk about together? Yeah. So a lot of like assertiveness is important as well. So, changing your verbs. So using will instead of could, or want instead of need. These are some of the very basic assertive techniques that people use.
What, because you talked about, being calm in the moment, especially when it happens. What sort of techniques do you teach your clients, for example, to help, at least try to consciously keep ourselves calm during these moments? Because, by nature, it's hard to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it can be done two ways. One, I would, usually train them on building up resilience through their mindset, So I will work on them to try and process what are their inherent attitudes and beliefs, towards people or themselves in general. And, I'll try and teach them to have, a better mindset towards themselves and towards the situation. So definitely this is something that they need to do preemptively. So before they even like go to work, like when you're like getting ready in the morning, just to like hype yourself up, just to say that, okay, I'm going to practice like calmness, positivity, neutrality, for example, and then try and manifest that in your daily functioning. Another thing that I also teach them would be like mindfulness exercises. So whether it's, just very simple like breathing exercises, whether it's, just noticing your thoughts but not having any judgments towards it. This is something that maybe you can do like, just before you have that difficult conversation with a colleague or a manager, just to recognize that you are not defined by the thoughts that you hold. Thoughts are basically by definition just images that are created in your brain, and they are driven more by our insecurities and fears, but it does not necessarily mean that in reality this is what is really going to happen. So it's just noticing your thoughts and allowing it to pass, and trying to ground yourself in knowing who you are as a person and what your intentions are, when going forward and talking to someone or having a difficult conversation. That's another thing, actually, just as I'm saying it, knowing what your intention is. It's good to go into a conversation, or if you're doing anything stressful for that matter, to know what your intention is very clearly in your head, so that you don't get so flustered. Like sometimes conversations can get very emotional and everyone kind of like, pulls in everything, mother, father, past history. And then, we kind of lose the plot halfway, especially when it's so emotionally driven. So I think going in knowing like, okay, what's the intention? What is the outcome from this conversation that I want to have? And just trying to remain and stick to that throughout the conversations that you're having.
Yeah. I liked the phrase you mentioned, you said about that we're not defined by the thoughts in our mind. I think that's always good to remember. And I mean, it's one of those things where we really have to be mindful and conscious of that fact, because
it's true.
I mean, we forget that our thoughts are really just a lens, an added lens to the world, and not really the world itself. So
it's true. And sometimes it can be very biased. I mean, depending on our life experiences, like if we've experienced trauma in our lives, or if we've experienced, being hurt before, that will definitely, influence how we view ourselves and view other people, So it's good to just have a very neutral. I know it's hard because these thoughts are very hard to let go of, because it's always driven by emotions or fears, but it's important to also realize at the end of the day, these are merely thoughts. They can't hurt us, and it's really how we choose to respond to these thoughts. So yeah, it's just a decision to respond in a way that's healthier, rather than assume that we're horrible people and that we don't deserve any better. That's just not the path we want to take.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's, and to your point, I think there's also something to be said about practicing a little bit of self-compassion as we go through these practices as well, right? I mean, one can prescribe the solutions such as be calm, but chances are, at least at the start, 90% of the time, we won't be able to get it right. And for us to just tell ourselves that it's okay, we'll figure out how to be calm along the way. It's a process.
Exactly. Yeah. Like I find, especially these days, because of the pandemic and because, people have been more hard on themselves, they don't forget that the situation, it's purely circumstantial that they are feeling this way. It has got nothing to do with them being incompetent, or nothing to do with them, not doing enough work-wise. Because I've had so many clients, who before this pandemic occurred, they were saying like, oh, I was so successful, I was making this much sales and business was good, and everything, and now everything's not good, and I'm worried, and I'm very anxious, and it makes me feel like, I'm not doing a good enough job. So that compassionate element, like I find I've been doing a lot more compassionate therapy. There actually is a type of therapy called compassionate therapy, which actually teaches you to practice kindness instead of judgment. So, practicing more kindness in how you talk to yourself versus, being very judgmental of what you're doing, So it's just reminding yourself that, hey, I'm actually doing all I can given the circumstances. Sometimes in life, we can be doing everything, we can really be pulling out all the shots. We can really be just trying our best. But unfortunately, if we have unrealistic high expectations, or if circumstances, don't allow for it, we may not actually get the desired outcome, but it's not a reflection of your worth. It really is just a reflection of the circumstances that we're in, and that's it, but it shouldn't take away the amount of effort that you've actually put into whatever it is that you're doing. So yeah, definitely being compassionate, practicing kindness, not being so hard on yourself. I think that is one of the life lessons I've learned for myself as well. It took me the longest time to learn, because when I was a kid, I mean, typical Singaporean, right? Like, I mean, I was so driven by the validation of others. You get good grades, it means you're worth. You get a good job, it means you're worth. You get the biggest present in a party, you're the most popular. So that was how I was driven when I was younger, and it's taken me the longest time to realize that we cannot be so driven by external validation all the time, because what happens if it goes away? Like, what happens in a zombie apocalypse? when, these things don't matter anymore. It really just depends on your own intrinsic values as a person, your ability to adapt, your attitudes, your habits. These are the things that you should be defined by, and not so much by the validation.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting that you brought that up, because one of the challenges we face is, especially in a culture like Singapore, is, when you grow up with external metrics as a form of validation, you can't just, like, when you graduate, suddenly when people tell you, like, okay, but external validation is not that important. You can't. I mean, it doesn't make sense, right? You'd be like, huh? But for 20 years, you've been saying, saying that's all that mattered. So it takes time, I suppose. But
it does.
And conversely, I think people also just have to recognize that, whatever metric that you choose to define yourself with, if nothing else, and I mean, I don't come from it as an expert, but more someone who's experienced certain things, I suppose. I think it's just about acknowledging that if you're going to measure yourself, make sure it's the measurements that you choose for yourself, and not.
Ooh, yeah. That's deep.
Because if not, it's going to be so frustrating all the time.
Yeah, it's true. And it really is a journey, because some people, they're so used to, basing their worth or their metric on other people's standards. So they kind of forget, or they don't even know, they don't even know how to, like, how do I find, like, my worth, or how do I know what my values are, and it takes courage again, to be able to go on that journey with yourself, and to learn experientially, like, okay, what are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What is it I like? What is it I don't like? It does take time. They don't teach it in school, unfortunately. They really should, actually, instead of just being so focused on the academics. But I mean, to MOE's credit, they are doing a lot better now in terms of, advocating mental health, and having school counselors, talk a little bit more about the importance of self-care and the importance of, seeing yourself in a more holistic manner, instead of just being so driven by the academics.
Yeah. I mean, I don't mean, as a host, I shouldn't thread off the topic, but I think this is very interesting, because it's part of how we've grown up. So I think it's important to address. Something
it does permeate to how we interact as adults, in our work environment.
I agree. And something someone told me, and this was a friend of mine who left teaching, and she said something that was so interesting to me, because I never thought of it that way. She said, like, the best example of an education system that maybe didn't get the fundamentals right is the fact that we have physical education that teaches us all these things, but they never teach you how to do it. So, for example, when you start physical education or PE classes in primary school, but yet when you see 16-year-olds who don't even have the right running technique, and then by the time they are 30, they have knee injuries, ankle injuries, and stuff like because physical education was meant to teach you how to function and be mobile, and it's not just about you being healthy, but how to do it the right way so that you can it's sustainable. But that was never inculcated in us, and so by the time you're 30, you see people behaving like they're 60.
Exactly. And I mean, if you talk on a mental health angle, we teach our kids how to do well academically. Like, we tell them that, okay, you have to be very hardworking, you have to memorize and regurgitate, you have to be able to score well. But we don't actually teach kids enough, like, what do you do when you fail? Or what do you do when, like, you have a classmate who's keep comparing their marks with you? Like, how do you handle that? How do you respond to that? And even though these happen in school settings, it's also quite translatable to the workplace, like, how do you handle when you have a colleague, who's toxic and just, keeps, flaunting their accolades in front of you, or makes you do things that you don't actually want to do? Or how do you handle when, you spend a lot of time doing a project and then it doesn't turn out the way you want it to? So it actually is very translatable in terms of what we learn in school and how we apply it as adults.
Yeah, I think it definitely permeates to other aspects beyond education. I mean, you brought up toxic colleagues, and I think that's something that many of us would probably experience at some point in our career. They come in all shapes and forms, I suppose.
They do.
But in your opinion, what is an example or a definition of a toxic colleague?
Okay, so I mean, based on the experiences that I've had, working with clients who do have these problems, and then they come to me and they don't know how to fix it. One of the ones that is very common, so the one I can think of off the top of my head would be like a demanding manager, for example, who tends to micromanage, calls you at all hours of the day to follow up on work when that should actually be his responsibility. This is a very common thing that happens, especially in Singapore, where it's all about productivity and getting out like really quickly. So how you would handle it, I think boundaries is very important. So establishing clear boundaries with your boss that makes him understand what your current workload is important. Managing expectations and not being afraid to communicate that okay, this is actually all I can do, and being very clear and assertive about it. Because sometimes saying that you can't do everything doesn't mean that you're weak in any way. It just means that you actually know what your capacity is, and you're being realistic with how you handle things. But of course, I mean, don't use it as an excuse, not to do your work or anything. Of course, you have to be very objective.
But if I could, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but
okay.
It's if I could just almost have a rebuttal to that, I don't think it's us seeing ourselves as weak, but rather us perceiving that our manager sees us as being weak. So I think that's the more important thing, because I see myself as weak, I care enough about myself to say that's okay, I can improve, no big deal. But when other people's expectation of me doesn't match what they would like me to do, and then it affects
so that's the fear of judgment that comes in again, so it's really just learning to trust your ability and in your own judgment to gauge the timelines and the potential pitfalls. Like I have clients that come to me and they tell me that these are all the things that my boss want me to do, and like they forget that actually they do have a lot of worthy experience and relevant experience that have got them through similar situations before, but they don't tap on it because sometimes the bosses make them feel like they're incompetent, or make them feel like they know more than they do, the person. So I think it's just being very aware of what your abilities are, and definitely showing courage to communicate it. So it's important to try and keep the people in the loop, and instead of believing that everything is okay, because sometimes when we tend to avoid the problem and we feel like okay, it'll kind of go away on its own, it doesn't usually go away. It'll come up in some form. So it's important to say, I owe it to myself and I owe it to the person, just to be open and honest. If I can't do it, I have to just let them know that I can't do it. I know it's easier said than done in certain situations, but I think if you get into that practice of having that open communication and not feel like people are always going to hold you accountable to everything that you do, then you can actually definitely progress a little bit more.
What's a good way or the correct way to communicate this expectation and to have that kind of open communication and trust?
So I think depends on what the culture is in the work environment. I think definitely do it privately, like don't do it over lunch in front of everybody. So definitely treat the situation with respect, and treat it as a confidential issue that you want to discuss with your boss. So definitely speak to him and tell him very openly and honestly, like, okay, like, have you ever heard of like the burger, the feedback burger?
I have not, but you're speaking my language. So.
Burger. Yes. Okay, so the feedback burger is one where, like, initially you start off first by saying something positive. So you say like, okay, I'm very grateful that you have tasked me to do this project, and have given me this opportunity. Then the meat part is the negative feedback that you want to give. But however, I've been struggling in this area, or I feel like I can't actually I can't actually work after my office hours, and this is something that I cannot negotiate because, I have other commitments, and, I hope you'll respect it. And then you start off with something, positive, end off with something positive. So that's like the bottom of the burger to say, like, but, overall, I am still excited to see how this project will turn out. So that is an effective way of communicating the feedback burger. There's another name for it, which is a little bit more vulgar, but like, yeah, but yeah,
it's okay. It's this podcast allows vulgarity. So do you want to share what that is?
Some of my other therapists call it like the shit sandwich because you're like
fair enough. Yeah.
Officially, it's called the feedback burger. Yeah.
Okay, the feedback burger. Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I suppose a lot of it, especially healthy communication. It seems from what you're telling me, and please correct me if I'm wrong. It seems like a lot of it really revolves around the fact that you are willing to trust the other person to accept, whatever it is you're telling them, but also to almost let it go if it doesn't fall your way, because these are non-negotiables for you. So there's very little thing. I mean, you can't control how they're going to react to it, and it's more like saying your piece.
That's true. But I mean, even though you can't control how they would react with it, part of the assertive training, that I usually encourage my clients to practice is just to be like a broken record, just to always assert your boundaries, and always repeat what your needs are and what your wants are, and don't waver in any way, as long as you feel like it's reasonable, like having your own time after work is a reasonable thing to do, unless, you went into the work knowing that was the premise, where you're expected to work after office hours and be on call 24 hours, unless if that was not communicated to you initially, and if that wasn't the expectation, then definitely it's something that you need to address. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. The problem with people with boundaries that are not so clear is that sometimes they give in, and then when they give in, the boss, who's a little bit toxic maybe, and then if they decide to like put that boundary, the boss will be like, hey, but the last time you were able to do it, well, how come now you can't do it? So,
yeah.
Yeah, so then it's a little bit difficult, but I mean, we're not here to be nice to everyone as well, because sometimes we have to look out for what our emotional needs are, and it's really just about looking after ourselves, not in a selfish way, but just to know that, okay, these are the perimeters that I can work out from, and even though you may get some pushback from it, because if people have not been in the habit of asserting their boundaries, and then suddenly they do it, definitely people are going to be like not happy about it. You'll definitely have people say like, oh, you're being difficult, you're being unreasonable. But again, that's why it's so important to know what your strengths and weaknesses are, and grounding yourself in knowing your values. And if you know that very objectively you are doing a good job, there's nothing wrong with the way that you are performing your work, then it's okay. It's just about having that courage to follow it through.
Right. What in that case, what's how do we assert ourselves? Okay, maybe you can provide some examples or ways that we can, or would it help if I was the example? I don't know what's the best way to bring this across.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, I always tell my clients that assertiveness is based on balance, whereas aggressive behavior is based on winning. So you have to go into the conversation knowing that, okay, I just want to have a balanced, fair chance at getting my points across. So you need the mindset, of course, is important, like what we spoke about just now, like it's about being in the right mindset, and then after that, knowing what your intentions are, and then implementing it through the communicative techniques. So definitely the mindset needs to be one where, you do value yourself and your rights, and you have a good understanding of what your strengths and weaknesses are. And it's just learning to stand by what your values are, and what is it that you want to manifest within the organization. And then, assert yourself, confidently, but not in a way where it's self-deprecating, or not in a way that implicates other people, because that's like manipulation or triangulation, which we don't want to do.
Right.
Like just keep to the task on hand, and not get the emotions involved. So definitely expressing yourself in a positive way is important as well. Don't put yourself down immediately, because we don't know what the other person is thinking, right? Like the other person maybe has no idea that you've been feeling this way, so there's no point in us saying like, oh yeah, I know I'm a horrible like worker, this is why this is why I'm doing this. Learning to say no, I think, is important as well. I don't know, when in your corporate work, because I work in private practice, so it's pretty much very individual. But when you in your workplace, do you find that some colleagues have difficulty saying no, like to their bosses or to other colleagues?
I think people always ask that. I mean, in general, not about my workplace, but in general. But what I've noticed is that every one of us has the inability to say no when it comes to certain things, but then we are very good at saying no with things that we are, I don't know, that we're just confident enough to say no to. Some of us are naturally confident to say, oh, 6 p.m, sorry, bye-bye, but then some of us, it's like, oh, okay, no one's going to do it. Yeah, you want me to do it? Okay, sure, I'll do it. So I mean, I don't have a big sample size for that, but what I've noticed in my workplace, at least, is that everyone has some things that they feel confident enough to say no to, and some things that they're either scared or uncomfortable to say no to. So I think it feels like it's a spectrum more than a end all.
Yeah, I mean, the people that I see, like, in my practice, they do struggle with this. They struggle with saying no because, maybe previously when they did say no, it was met with rejection or met with, being ostracized in some way. So they've kind of feared, expressing themselves. And so because of that, they become like people pleasers. They always just want to go above and beyond. But the problem with being so self-sacrificial is that, you never actually practice self-care, and you feel that by saying no, you're doing something like horribly wrong, or that, you're letting other people down, which may not actually be the case, So I think learning to say no is definitely an important skill to have in terms of, communicating assertively in your workplace. I think being open to criticism and compliments is important too. In the Asian context, especially, we are not open to criticism, and we are also not open to compliments.
Right, yeah.
Like, we tend to, when people criticize us or when people give us negative feedback, we internalize a lot. We believe that, this is bad, my whole career is ruined, and people will never look at me the same way again, and that's the typical spiral that we tend to go in. It's the same with compliments as well. We have so much difficulty just accepting that, I actually did a good job, and we don't really acknowledge our strengths enough. I think, again, it's because of the culture that we live in. We don't want to appear as arrogant or like haolian, right? So we tend to like, oh, no, it's okay, paise, but
right.
the thing is that we should actually acknowledge, our strengths and be open to compliments, because that's not how we're going to build our self-confidence, and our self-esteem. So I think having that good balance actually does help us to be more assertive, because it just gives us a better self-awareness of who we are.
Yeah.
Practicing empathy is another one. Sorry, I just thought about it. Like practicing empathy, like being kind to yourself and knowing that, okay, this person must have been feeling a certain way. That's why this person, treated me that way. So giving benefit of doubt and practicing empathy kind of go hand in hand. Of course, if it's someone who, constantly berates you or constantly criticizes you, then maybe, you need to be a bit more smart about it and be objective about it. But if it's like a first time offense, quote unquote, and you're not sure, it's good to just give benefit of doubt and see like, okay, what is this person going through? Maybe she's having a hard time, maybe like she's having some issues that, are being like projected in her work. So maybe I just need to like practice that patience and just come down to a level and sort things out.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm done now. Sorry.
No.
Over you.
I mean, it's your time. It's your time to shine. But it's when you talk about that, especially with the fact that there's a lot of self-control when it comes to emotions. I start to understand the value of intent Because only then, when if you know the intent of why you are speaking to someone, then it's easier to drown out the emotions.
Exactly.
Whereas if you're just going there, no, I just need to say no, or
exactly.
everything else comes fluttering in.
Yeah, that's why intention is so important, and it's good to just go in with that mindset. Not that you need to control the whole situation and be like, okay, this is exactly what I'm going to say, I'm going to script it out, but more just knowing what your intention is and what are you hoping to get out of that interaction with people. And that's what I say to my clients too. Like, usually in when I start the session, I'll be like, okay, what do you hope to get out of this session today? Like, so that when you leave the session, you feel like you're equipped with this. Like, it's good to just set it out at the start so that, you can be the most productive in whatever it is that you're doing.
Yeah, it's interesting because I suppose, like as with any, whether it's workplace or outside of work, regular relationships from friends, family, etc., a lot of it really just boils down to I mean, I don't know whether it boils down to it, but a key component is really the trust you have in the relationship, that you're open enough to say what you want, to assert your needs, and to not feel like it's going to be held against you, but rather what would come of that is a constructive conversation to get to a solution.
Exactly. And sometimes we struggle to trust the people in our workplace. Like, sometimes they may be the ones who, may be going through some difficulties, or they haven't proven that they can be trustable. But, it's always important to remind yourself that I need to learn to trust myself. So like, what does it mean to trust myself? Like, how can I trust myself more? So it's really through the techniques that, I've shared that you can actually build more trust in yourself to say, like, okay, I know what my strengths and weaknesses are. I know how to say no. I can identify situations without getting so emotionally involved. These are all stepping stones that help you to build trust within yourself. So it doesn't really matter like what happens in the situation. At least you know that, okay, I'm doing my best. I'm handling it in a way that, I'm honoring myself. I'm honoring what it is that I want to stand for. And that's it. Whatever the outcome is, I can handle it. And even if I cannot, I know what the resources are or where to go to get the support and help that I need. Yeah.
Right. So I think this is a good segue to really the final question to really sum it all up. If there was like one thing or one process, and you've mentioned it a few times, that you would want the listeners to take away so that, this can be immediately actionable in their workplace, what would it be?
Okay, well, I think like what we've spoken a lot about today was, about being assertive. So it's just reminding yourself that you do have the power to be assertive. You are only a victim to things for as long as you put up with it, So this changes the moment you decide to command the respect and that you deserve really in a calm and assertive fashion. And you are really not defined by the stresses in your life. You're defined by how you respond to these stresses. So don't take it out on yourself. If you're not sure how to handle, some of the difficult workplace situations, give yourself time to process. A lot of times we're very kanchong. We want to and answer it like yesterday, like straight away. But it's good to just give yourself time to process, reflect and come up with a plan on how you want to respond appropriately. You don't need to know all the answers straight away. Avoiding the problem, like Nick 10 years ago, maybe.
No, 10 years ago, I didn't avoid the problem. And so now,
20 years ago. Yeah, may seem like, an easier short-term solution, but it usually never makes the issue go away, So confronting it with compassion towards yourself and having courage is the key. So yeah, I know there's a few points in there, but I think if you can practice some of it, straight away, it would really make a difference, and it'll make work like more enjoyable, at least more peaceful for you. Yeah, because you spend so much time at work anyway. We all spend most of our lives at work, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But yeah, we spend so many hours in of the week, at work. We should try and make it a situation where it's conducive, where we're growing, where it's in line with what we want for ourselves. And even though it may not be perfect, like if only we all could find the perfect workplace or the perfect place to work at. But we can just try our best, to make it easier for ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if life isn't perfect, why should the workplace be, right? It's more like just making the best of the
Yeah,
situation.
exactly. Yeah, just making the best of the situation, doing what we can, because we're not expecting like perfection. We just want progress, like I always tell my clients, aim for progress, not perfection, because perfection sometimes never comes, especially if you like have very unrealistic high standards for yourself, and it's impossible sometimes because we don't live in a vacuum. There are a lot of other external variables that may impede your perfection, perfect situation. So just aim for progress, just aim to be better, and learn from your whatever mistakes or whatever setbacks that you're having, and move forward. Yeah.
There was a quote you said earlier, and I was wondering if you could repeat that. It's something you said something about. Trying to remember now. it something about you. You. It's basically about taking control of the situation.
Yeah.
Do you remember that? It's suddenly.
Mm,
It's cool. I mean,
that's
we can
okay.
we
Like,
can play
which
back the
one?
recording
Yeah,
and
yeah, put it back.
but yes, it was
Yeah.
something about basically like you know, with not having the victim mindset,
Oh yeah, exactly. Like I mean, it's just reminding yourself that you have the power to be assertive, and you are only a victim to things for as long as you put up with them. Was
That's the
that the
one.
one?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's the one.
Yeah.
You're only a victim of things if you put up with them.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's really just changing the mindset from seeing yourself as being a victim of the circumstance to see yourself more as a survivor of it. Like, okay, I'm surviving this. I'm managing it. I can get on top of things instead of feeling very like, this thing is controlling me and I have no options or no way out. Yeah.
Yeah. So now that we've got those things out of the way, I just wanted to ask like more like a reflective question, because I always like to get people's it's particularly interesting, especially when I ask this question to helping professionals, because we always see people in this profession as someone without problems, but the truth is we all go through difficulties.
Yeah, it's true.
So it's always important for listeners to remember that even the people who help us come from a place of experience and growth.
Yeah, for sure.
So I mean, I'm interested if you could think about a time that you felt there was a low point, especially at that moment, but it actually changed you for the better.
Wow.
What would it be?
Well, I think there was a time when I myself struggled with boundaries, and I struggled because I was, as part of me being so driven by the validation academically, I think I was also driven by the validation from others, like in terms of like when other people compliment me or say that, I did a good job. That was the thing that kind of fueled my desire to be well liked or by everybody. So because of that, I inherently attracted a lot of toxic people in my life, people who ended up being very controlling and took me for granted in a lot of different ways. So I think that was quite a struggle for me. It gave me quite a lot of anxiety as well, having to put those boundaries to say that, this is my time. I don't want to hang out, or I don't have the time to hang out. I'm sorry, in fact, I shouldn't even be sorry, because it really is my own time, and because of the toxic, situation that I was in, it caused the person actually would kind of like low-key punish me for not doing what they wanted me to. So then it was just this very toxic cycle that I was in. It was only when I realized that, this had just gone too far and I was becoming a shell of myself, that I realized that, okay, I need to actually have those boundaries, recognize that my time is my time and that's okay. And that people who actually do respect me and value me will learn to give me that space, So I think it was really from removing the toxic people in my life did I actually grow the most, because I was so afraid. Initially, I was telling myself, if this person was not in my life, then, I would have one less friend, which means I'm like less popular. So If you think about it now, it sounds so silly and so superficial. But back then, like, it meant everything to me. You ask my mom, she always say like, yeah, Tracie, friends very important one.
Yeah.
But now I realize that, it's not the way to do things. And, the people that you have in your life are also a reflection of who you want to be. And it's true. So I mean, now I value like surrounding myself with good energy, people who lift me up, people who are not, who don't feed into the ego-driven behavior, of needing the validation, needing to be in competition with other people. So yeah, I feel like that's where I've really grown the most. Yeah.
That's awesome. It's always nice. I always feel like those in helping professions, when they express their experience, people, or at least in my experience, people tend to listen a little bit more because we're not just, people tend to think, oh, as a psychologist, everything's objective, right? I come from a place of, but it's always, chances are all those in helping professions have some sort of impetus in their life that led them down this road.
I totally agree, Nate. There's a very famous psychologist, like way back, like the grandfather of psychology, Carl Jung. I don't know if you've heard of him.
I have, yes.
But he is the one who conceptualized this theory of the wounded healer. So people who are usually in healing professions, like whether it's mental health, social work, they tend to thrive in their work if they've experienced some sort of pain in their lives before. If not, it kind of makes them a bit disconnected and unrelatable to the people that they're working with. So yeah, so I mean, I'm not ashamed of it. I feel like all the life experiences that I've had, whether it's good or bad, has actually helped me to be more sensitive and empathetic to my clients. And I mean, at the end of the day, they are the ones who will benefit from my setbacks or my experiences.
That's awesome. Wonderful.
Yeah.
I mean, on that note, maybe you want to tell the listeners what you can help with and how they can connect with you.
Okay, so as a clinical psychologist, I usually see people, who are struggling with emotional distress in their lives. So it doesn't have to be, medical, like clinically diagnosed symptoms. So I mean, I do see people with that. So people with anxiety, depression, eating disorders, anger management. But I also see other people, who do not actually meet criteria for anything. So people, who have interpersonal problems, who have problems with like addictions, for example, or they may have like work stress. I mean, since we're talking about communication in the workplace. So whenever you have like something that, you just don't know how to handle and you just need a different perspective, or you just need someone to assess you and teach you how to cope with it, that's what my role is, to teach you practical steps that you can take, whether it's, cognitively, so, just kind of processing in your mind and coming up with a healthier mindset, or whether it's behaviorally, so maybe, setting up exposure therapy for you, or setting up, behavioral situations where maybe you can practice some of the strategies that we've learned. So that's basically what I do in a nutshell. I see clients of all ages. So sometimes I see children who have like, learning difficulties or problems with school, like bullying or anxiety, performance anxiety, adults, as well as elderly, like people who struggle with like dementia or life stage changes. So yeah, it's really for all ages, whoever feels like, they want an alternative to medication, because medication, it helps to, reduce the symptoms, but therapy actually helps you to learn and pick up skills on how to better manage the symptoms. So I think having it in tandem actually is very beneficial in recovery. So that's basically what I do.
Awesome. How can they get in touch?
I actually work out of two places. So I work at Mount E out of LP Clinic. So LP Clinic is located at Mount Elizabeth Medical Center. So that one is like an office hours clinic where there are psychiatrists there as well. So if they feel like their condition requires medication, then they can see me over there. And then from there, we can refer you to the psychiatrist just to get like a more holistic treatment. But I also run an after office hours clinic, which is a little bit like my baby pet project.
Nice.
Called Inner Light Psychological Services. So I'm working out of a clinic there in Chinatown. So that is more for like your working adults, clients who can't make the office hours. So if they want to see me like after 5 p.m., they would see me there. or if they want to see me on the weekends, like in the afternoons, then they would see me there as well. But in both places, the services are more or less the same. In terms of contact details, I'm really bad with numbers.
That's okay. What I'll do is I'll put it in the podcast description.
Okay,
so
that's
you
great.
don't have to
Thanks,
remember
Nick.
now.
Yeah.
Nobody remembers phone numbers
Nobody,
now. Anyway, so,
literally.
yeah. In fact, the other day, my wife was telling me, in case of an emergency, do you remember my number? I was like, I was like, it starts with a 1.
I really numbers. I only can remember my sister's number because our mobile numbers are exactly the same. It's just the last 4 numbers that are different. But that's the easiest. Yeah, because we went together in secondary school to like register for our phone numbers, and so it happened to be like the same. But other than that, like I can't remember anyone else's number. It's really bad.
Yeah, we're not equipped for emergencies. That's for sure.
We're not. We're too reliant on technology. That's the problem.
I know. Yeah, but hey,
First world problems.
Yeah. Well, Tracie, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to do this. It was really interesting, and if there's any other topics that is worth exploring, I'd love to have you back on the podcast.
Yeah, for sure. It's been actually really, really fun. I enjoyed this. It was very chill, quite interactive. Yeah, it's my very first podcast actually.
Is it? Oh wow!
Yeah,
okay.
It is. I mean, I used to do this thing for radio like long time ago in secondary school where like it used to be like a children's radio station and he needed like kids to play like the kids role in the stories that they were sharing on the radio. But that was it. That was like my only other like experience with like radioing or podcasting.
But that's great experience. I mean, that sounds professional.
In a way.
Whereas now we're like, is the Zoom? Hello, can you?
Oh my gosh, yeah. Yeah, that one was like a full on like legit sound system and everything. But I was definitely more scripted though. Like this one's a little bit more fluid and spontaneous.
Yeah, I mean, I try to make it conversational because I mean it would be boring for me otherwise. So it's better to make to make it interesting for me. If not, why do this, right?
Yeah. But I mean, keep doing what you're doing, Nick. It's been great, having the opportunity to talk to you and being able to share with your listeners. Hopefully they've picked up something from this podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Tracie. And hopefully we'll see you back sometime soon.
Sure. Happy to.
All right.
Do you see me or no? I'm just like
yes, I mean,
thumbs upping you.
People can see you on YouTube. Don't worry, the thumbs up will be seen.
Thumbs up.
We'll ensure that.
Good. You can put that as like my profile pic.
We can put that as the thumbnail. They're like, and people will be like, "What's going on?"
Yeah, very professional. Yeah, I want to see her for sure for therapy.
Dr. Tracie Lazaroo, then with a thumbs up. They're like, not sure if this is legit.
I know, it's also dodgy.
Well, thanks so much, Tracie.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.